the 2024 general election on Bro Radio.
Good evening, I'm Rhys Potter. And you're listening to Bro Radio as we present the second of two programmes allowing you to put your questions to the candidates looking for your vote on the 4th of July. As well as listening on Bro Radio this evening, you can also watch this full programme via Bro Radio's social media and YouTube channels.
Over the next hour, we'll be putting questions submitted by you and our audience joining us here at YMCA Barry via the Bro Radio website, directly to the candidate standing in the Vale of Glamorgan Constituency. Candidates have not been told the questions in advance of this recording, and they'll be given no more than 1 minute to answer, to make sure we can get through as many of your questions during this programme.
Joining us this evening is Joe Kidd, representing Conservative Party candidate Alan Cairns, Green Party candidate Lyndon Mack, Labour Party candidate Kanishka Narayan, Liberal Democrats candidate Stephen Rajam, Plaid Cymru candidate Ian Johnson, and Reform UK's candidate Toby Rhodes. Conservative Party candidate Alan Cairns told us he was unable to join us this evening due to other commitments. Also standing in the Vale of Glamorgan constituency is Abolish the Assembly candidate Stuart Field and Independent candidate Stephen Sluman. Throughout the programme, I'll be keeping the candidates on track, making sure questions are answered in no more than a minute, so we can get through as many of your questions as possible. If you're in the audience tonight and have submitted a question, please stand up when we hear your name and Lily will make her way over to you. Before we start, each candidate will be given 1 minute to set out why you should vote for them and their party on July the 4th. And we'll begin with Plaid Cymru candidate Ian Johnson.
Noswaith dda. My name is Councillor Ian Johnson and I'm the Plaid Cymru candidate. I represent the centre of Barry and have been elected as a councillor 3 times since 2012. I've been the Plaid Cymru group leader since 2017 on the Vale Council and had the honour of being the mayor of Barry last year. I'm from Barry originally. I went to Romilly Primary and then to Barry Boys School, where I later became a school governor. And I've also been a governor at Gladstone and Whitmore High. I'm not just a politician, I'm also a community centre trustee at Alexandra Gardens, a volunteer at Barry Arts Festival, and I'm well known in local football circles, having written a book about Barry Town United. With my local knowledge and decades of experience in public service, it would be a great honour to represent the Vale of Glamorgan in the House of Commons.
Fantastic, thank you. The next candidate is Joe Kidd, representing Conservative candidate Alan Cairns.
Alan's sorry that he can't be with you this evening and has made this statement. After living in the community for over 25 years, I am hugely excited about what we have started across Barry and the Vale, and I want to finish the job. A £20 million investment in a marina is hugely popular and will be a major boost in attracting further investment. The marina, along with the additional £20 million I have secured for town centre regeneration, will make Barry the most attractive place in Wales to invest. When we add a new train station for St Athan, to complement attracting Aston Martin to the heart of the Vale, and commit to protecting green spaces from Labour's overdevelopment, the sky is the limit. After 25 years of Labour running Wales, their record is blanket 20 miles per hour, longer NHS waiting times, poor education standards and a failure to tackle polluted waterways. Labour will take us back to square one. My plan for the Vale, with support from local residents, of a marina, train station and town centre regeneration will take us forward. Don't put this at risk.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Labour Party candidate Kanishka Narayan.
Joe and Rhys and Lily and all of you. I'm Kanishka. I grew up in Cardiff and the Vale offered both my parents the opportunity of good work, but also my brother and I the opportunity of a breathing space on weekends on Barry Island, the first beach I saw. It's been an amazing privilege to be back in Barry over the course of the last couple of years, living on the waterfront and hearing your views. There are 3 reasons why I want to be your candidate and your MP, hopefully. 1, I have a personal connection to the Vale, to South Wales, that I'm really proud of. 2, I have professional experience. As an advisor at the Prime Minister's Department and then to the Environment Secretary, I fought for our country at the national level before. And 3, I think I'm the only candidate who's not just present tonight, but has been present for 18 months knocking on your doors, 40,000 doors, listening to you, trying to bring you into politics in a different way. Participatory politics that puts you and our community first. Those are the reasons for why I hope to be your personal candidate. I'm excited to talk about politics and policy shortly too.
Thank you, Kanishka. Next up is Green Party candidate Lyndon Mack.
Noswaith dda, pawb. Look at the state we're in. We're living through an era of austerity that we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. The country feels broken. 600,000 people on waiting lists for NHS treatment here in Cymru. People unable to get GP appointments, prisons overflowing, lack of police, public transport, potholes, you name it, all signs of our national malaise. 28% of kids here in Cymru live in poverty. Rising debts, food banks in the 6th richest country on earth, for God's sake. Enormous waiting lists for social housing, young people unable to get property ladder, while at the same time the super rich get even richer. We have all witnessed decades of inaction on the climate and nature emergencies. The lights are flashing red. All of this under governments of both stripes, Tory incompetence in Westminster, Labour complacency in the Senedd. It's time for voters now to consider alternative political options.
Thank you, Lyndon. Next up is Liberal Democrat candidate Stephen Rajam.
Across Barry, the Vale of Glamorgan and the whole of the UK, people are hungry for change. Change from a Conservative government that's tanked our economy, created a cost of living catastrophe and plunged the NHS into crisis. And yet in Wales, Labour have been in power for 25 years, with many feeling completely taken for granted. What sort of change can Labour really promise Welsh people when they've already had a quarter of a century to act on it? Tonight, I hope I can show you that the Liberal Democrats are the only truly fair, open, progressive alternative to the status quo. A party that believes in fair taxes on the super profits of oil and gas companies, for example, not just higher taxes. A party that will crack down on sewage dumping, support unpaid carers, and fix the UK social care crisis. I joined the Lib Dems because I loved how the party cut through the tedious them and us arguments that make people sick of politics. On July the 4th, I'd love you to vote Lib Dem with me.
Thank you, Stephen. And finally, Reform UK candidate Toby Rhodes-Matthews.
Well, thanks for having me. The reason why I'm sat here right now is pretty much displayed with what we've got on the table in front of you. On the end there, Plaid Cymru, the lack of control, cohesion within the council and their communication with the residents across the Vale of Glamorgan is shocking. Along with the Conservative vote, well, we know how well we've done with that over the last 14 years. We're in a cost of living crisis. I don't see a reason for a marina. If we can barely afford to feed ourselves, then we wouldn't want to take the kid on the boat for the day, would we? Labour, good guy, but I've also fought for my country 20 years in the Royal Navy, served, time done, and I want to continue to serve the Vale of Glamorgan the best I can with honesty, openness and integrity that has been driven into me from day one as a military veteran. Green Party, I have to agree with a lot of those numbers.
Thank you, Toby. Let's go to our first question with Lily.
So we received a significant number of questions regarding the use of food banks and food poverty, and we have two representatives from the Vale Food Bank here today. I will go to one of their representatives, Graham Lovelock Edwards, for his question on the topic.
Thank you very much. To put into context who the Vale Food Bank are, we're a charity that provides food parcels for people in crisis in the Vale of Glamorgan across 8 centres. Last year we distributed 8,662 parcels. That's double the population of Cowbridge. That's a 29% increase on what was already a record year the year before. So what you see in front of you are the comments of people with lived experience who beat a food bank, telling us why this is happening. And I can summarise it as follows. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has calculated that a single adult needs £120 per week to afford the essentials. But Universal Credit starts at just £91 per week. That gap is the biggest factor driving people to use food banks. I want to ask the candidates if they are willing to commit to plug that gap and end the need for food banks once and for all.
With Kanishka Narayan.
Thank you for that incredibly pressing question. And look, having been a Trussell Trust volunteer, I've seen firsthand the impact in our communities of an economic crisis over the course of the last decade. The work you do is incredibly important collectively, and I'm grateful for it. There are 3 things I hope to commit to do very practically if I become the MP next week for the Vale of Glamorgan. First, the first thing I will do is set up a child poverty task force to crack down on what we've seen a horrific rise in deprivation in the Vale of Glamorgan and across the country over the course of the last decade in particular. That is a very practical thing. Second, not wait for party politics alone, but if I have the privilege, the first private member's bill I'd hope to pass would be focused on child poverty to try and give kids opportunity. In my part, I would hope to focus that on a credit union movement, but I'd be excited to talk to you about your priorities to do so. But third, at the big picture, I would be a very strong advocate. I've not just been a volunteer for the Trussell Trust, but a researcher on household debt. I would be a strong champion to take forward the right fiscal measures so that we don't see any of the damage. If you think about what Liz Truss's budget did to pensions and mortgages, never again.
Thank you, Kanishka. Next, we go to Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Well, first of all, thank you for all the work you do in the community, and without wishing to blow my own trumpet, I'd make weekly contributions to the local food bank as well. I see this as a multi-pronged approach to ending poverty. I touched on earlier that 28% of kids in Wales live in poverty. It's an absolute disgrace. One quick and immediate thing to address certainly the child aspect of this is we would scrap the 2-child limit on child benefit. We would get rid of that. That would be an immediate step that we would take. Beyond that, I mean, it's all about, for us, we're up front. We believe in taxation as a means of solving a lot of the problems our society faces, and we would look at the whole sweep of policies that affect people in this area. It's interlinked. It's to do with housing, cost of living, right across the board. I will give a commitment.
Thank you, Lyndon. We go to Stephen Rajam next.
Graham, yes, I will make that commitment, and the Lib Dems will make that commitment. And thank you. Reading the comments on the sheet you've brought, and it's just sobering and galvanising, because, as Linda mentioned, the figure of 28% of children in Wales living in food poverty is utterly shameful. And whatever our political differences on this table, I know that every single person at this Hustings wants to address that. As for the Lib Dems, like the Greens, we would tackle child poverty by removing the 2-child limit and the benefit cap. We would extend free school meals to all children in poverty, with the ambition to extend free school meals to all primary school children when public finances allow. And food poverty generally is crucial. We will tackle rising food prices by introducing a comprehensive national food strategy, which will ensure food security and end food poverty and hopefully improve health and nutrition for our children.
Thank you, Stephen. We go to Toby Rhodes next.
Thanks very much. Well, I think you've realised I'm a pretty straight-talking guy, and the best, yes, I would absolutely support, but I don't want to. You shouldn't exist, if I'm being honest. The Reform Party is about not taking away but putting money back. You know, we're about raising the baseline of tax threshold to 20,000 a year. You know, that would do two things. That would first of all put £1,500 a year back into the pockets of every medium-waged worker. And conversely, it would also give people on benefits the opportunity to say, well, actually, work does pay. So a lot of people on benefits want to come out of benefits, and they want to be able to. But unfortunately, if they do 16 hours or more work, then work doesn't pay. They find themselves out of pocket more. So for me, it's about providing opportunity for people to earn more money, to be able to move themselves out of going to the food banks, and have that self-sense of pride to be able to move on from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Next, we go to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
The practical answer to child poverty isn't setting up a task force, it's dealing with the issue in front of us, and that starts off by scrapping the 2-child cap with universal credit, scrapping the wider benefit cap, and then actually looking at the amount of money you can add to people's pockets to get them out of poverty. Plaid Cymru support an increase in child benefit of £20 per week per child, which would increase family incomes by £1,000 and allow them to deal with the cost of living crisis as we're facing it at the moment. The question from Graham was about the Essentials Guarantee. Plaid Cymru supports a manifesto pledge to support the Essentials Guarantee, £120 for adults, for a single adult, £200 for a couple, and also structure benefit sanctions in as much as they are required so that people don't fall below that level. And if we put everyone at that level, then that will, help us solve poverty at a stroke.
Thank you, Ian. And finally, we go to Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns.
Well, Graham, thank you for your question, and thank you for all that you do at the Vale Food Bank. The issue of food bank use comes down to the cost of living crisis, and how we tackle that is putting more money into the pockets of people who are in work. One of the ways that the Conservative government has tackled that is through the national insurance cut, cutting national insurance from 12% to 8%, with a further 2% cut as a manifesto commitment. And that has put £900 on average into the pockets of workers on roughly £35,000. Not only that, but one of the 5 pledges that the Prime Minister made to get to halve inflation has now been achieved, and we've gone beyond that by getting inflation down to 2%. So that will help hopefully bring down, in time, more money into people's pockets, put more money into people's pockets, and reduce the use of reliance on food banks.
Thank you, Joe. And we go to our next question.
This election is happening with the cost of living crisis on a lot of people's minds, and so we go to both Dr. Jonathan Hicks and Joe Harry for their questions that address this. We'll listen to both of their questions before you get the chance to answer. So first I'll go to Dr. Jonathan Hicks.
The Vale of Glamorgan has residential areas of great wealth and others of great deprivation and hardship, meaning great difficulties for many people in accessing basic public services. What would you do to ensure that these inequalities of access are addressed and that shared prosperity means exactly that?
And to Joe Harry.
Thank you. And it ties in with maybe some answers that you've given and Graham's question. What will your party do to work towards ensuring everyone can afford the essentials? Would you work to help reform universal credit so it does a better job at helping people afford the essentials?
So candidates, essentially what we're asking is what steps would you take to address the cost of living crisis and universal credit in the Vale of Glamorgan to help those in need?
Let's begin with Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns.
Well, there was a very important point there made about the variation in wealth across Barry, but across the Vale of Glamorgan. And sadly, that's one of the reasons why the Vale of Glamorgan has missed out on significant investment for so long. When money had to come through as European aid through the Welsh Government, other areas such as West Wales and the valleys were prioritised over the Vale of Glamorgan because of the mismatching of distribution of wealth across the Vale. And to overcome that now, we are seeing unprecedented levels of investment in the Vale of Glamorgan and in Barry in particular. We have a £20 million Barry Marina, which will attract further investment to the town and regenerate the mole, which is an otherwise relatively unused piece of land, and also a £20 million town centre regeneration fund, which will help our high streets and be another boost for the town.
Thank you, Joe. Next we go to Kanishka Narayan.
Thanks for both of those questions, an incredibly pressing thing. Look, there's some national things that we do straight away. One, a focus on economic stability, bring the cost of living down through a very tight, robust fiscal policy. Two, a focus on creating good jobs and bringing energy bills in particular down, which I've seen personally so many families suffering with. We've got a plan for homegrown energy to do that. Three, the thing I'd fight for, which is fair transport funding so that people across the Vale of Glamorgan, given the beautiful geography, but the large area we have, feel more connected. But at the heart of it, everything I'll do will focus on the dignity of people in the Vale of Glamorgan. When I've been as a volunteer delivering medicines in Gibbonstown, hearing the pharmacist tell me he prescribes multiples of what he prescribes for a similar pharmacy in Canton, it is unacceptable, and I'd focus not just on those national policies but on practical action locally, working with you.
Thank you, Kanishka. Next we go to Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Yeah, just building on my earlier answers regarding the child benefit and free school meals as well. I didn't mention that last time. Access to public services. Again, I come back to this. It's about chronic underinvestment in public services across the board. We would reform the tax system and put particular emphasis on obtaining new resources from the super wealthy. A 2% tax on those on billionaires and a 1% annual tax on people worth more than 10 million. That should free up, we think, over the course of a lifetime, 50 to 70 billion to invest in public services. We would also advocate for a universal basic income to support people in dire straits and to help out with the cost of living crisis there. And the general investment in the green economy, green jobs, that will create
Thank you,
wealth.
Lyndon. Next we've got Stephen Rajam from the Lib Dems.
Right. The variation of wealth across the Vale is staggering and shocking. I was reading that the average house price in the Vale, for instance, as of last month, is just topped £300,000. And you can just see the inequality inherent in that. The Lib Dems want to build a strong, fair economy that benefits everyone. And the key word there is fair. This isn't about raising taxes to generate income for the sake of it. We want to target oil and gas super profits to try and recoup some of the money there. We want to reform capital gains tax. I've already mentioned, just as Lyndon just has there, about we want to end the benefit cap, and the 2-child limit, and we want to provide free school meals for all children in poverty, and hopefully extend that to all primary school children. And we want to provide long-term help by cutting energy bills through an emergency home energy upgrade programme and tackle food prices through a national food strategy.
Thank you, Stephen. Next we go to Toby Rhodes-Matthews from Reform.
Thank you. Like I said, honesty is the best policy. So, the basic public services are devolved to the Senate, most of these. So from a Westminster perspective, we wouldn't be able to do much with them. I could certainly advocate and press for better transportation, which is what everybody deserves. But in terms of disparity, whether you're a high earner or you're struggling to find money behind the back of the sofa for milk, because I know I've been there, then unfortunately that's life. We can't bring together high earners and low earners as well. But what we can do is try to make everything affordable for everyone. So we could drop 20p off a price of fuel, because that sits in Westminster. We could raise we could remove VAT on your energy bills. Yeah, we could do that from Westminster. That affects everybody. We could also raise the VAT threshold where you start to pay tax if you're a small business owner. That puts more cash in the bank.
Thank you, Toby. Next we go to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
I think the answers to the two questions are both top down and bottom up. So in the sense of Westminster needs to provide adequate funding for our public services, which have been crippled by austerity, Brexit and Liz Truss in the last 14 years. And it also means working and identifying issues at a local level. As a councillor, I represent one of the more deprived areas that Jonathan's referring to. There's a project that's ongoing at the moment with the Public Services Board in the Vale of Glamorgan, where we're mapping out how people use the services, what can be done, whether these things are intuitive or sometimes counterintuitive. So we're really following people's actual experiences and therefore making evidence-based policy on the back of that. But when it comes then back to what we've already said about the essentials guarantee, about making changes to universal credit so that people get paid at an earlier rate rather than several weeks down the line, so that people don't find themselves in debt, making lots of repayments so quickly. So ensuring that the essentials are there, the universal credit, I think, is underpins everything in terms of people's lives.
Thank you, Ian. We go to our next question.
Another key point of this election is the fact we've seen our public services come under immense pressure, our health service in particular, with ever-rising waiting lists and disputes over pay. On that note, I go to David Nicholson for his question.
I've been to a lot of public meetings over the years, so I've seen a men-only panel which showed. Just a bit of context, I'm on the Wales TUC General Council as a National Union of Journalists delegate. We had a meeting with the Welsh Government to talk about the finance cuts in the budget, and we asked for a promise from the Welsh Government that services would be brought back in-house, all those contracted out services, so profit doesn't leak out of the public system. So what are you doing for Wales to support public services and public servant workers?
We're going to begin with Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Well, very first point, nearly half the Green Party candidates in Wales are female. But anyway, I'll move quickly on to the point. If I can focus on the NHS, which is a major area of focus for us, we are very determined to keep the profit motive well away from the NHS. We want fairer funding for us here in Cymru using the Barnett formula. We'll push for decreasing waiting lists and fair pay to reflect the skills of the NHS, the skills gap within the NHS, and for increased funding to tackle the waiting lists, and also putting a plan in place to make sure we've got enough NHS workers to meet the demand. I keep repeating myself. We go back to the funding, the chronic underfunding of the public services. We see as taxation as the way ahead to tackle that particular issue.
Thank you, Lyndon. We go next to Stephen Rajam from the Lib Dems.
Thank you. And there's so much that I could talk about when it comes to underfunding of services in the NHS. I hope you don't mind if I concentrate on one particular area, which is very dear to the Lib Dems, which is social care and carers. because carers, paid and unpaid, young and old, do a remarkable and important job, and they're too often ignored. I hope some of you might have seen Ed Davies' very personal Party Political broadcast earlier last week when he talked very movingly and openly about being a carer for his disabled son. And that's something that really matters to him and to us as a party. But, you know, social care services in this country are in crisis, and that has a huge knock-on effect on the NHS. You cannot fix the NHS if you don't fix social care. And here in the Vale, there's more than 15,000 carers, paid and unpaid. So we will bring in a higher carers minimum wage, establish a Royal College of Care Workers, and give carers the support they deserve by increasing carers' allowance and expanding it to more carers.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we go to Toby Rhodes-Matthews from Reform.
Again, honesty time. You know, none of this we can fulfil because it's all devolved through into the Senedd. But what I can tell you is that currently Wales receives £1.20 for every £1 spent across the bridge in England on the NHS. Given that Wales have got the longest waiting lists for healthcare, I'd say that money's not being spent very well, or the model in itself needs a change. I can't do anything about that, but what I can do is press for an Office of Budget Responsibility for the Welsh Senedd to ensure that they're spending taxpayers' money fairly and that the people in the Vale of Glamorgan are getting value for their money.
Thank you, Toby. Next, we go to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
We should be removing the profit principle where it's not relevant or needed. Where there's no competition, then why on earth should people be making money out of it, or why should they be turning the screw and making vast amounts of money? For example, we've talked issues about, for example, looked after children, making sure that private profit is removed after that. We've seen the issue with Park Prison recently, which tragically a number of people have lost their lives. Prison justice shouldn't be privatised. That's clearly a state responsibility. The last 35 years of privatisation in the water sector has clearly shown absolute failure to maintain infrastructure while at the same time shareholders getting rich off it. There's so much here that shouldn't be done. Where there are monopolies, they shouldn't be ripping people off.
Thank you, Ian. Next we've got a Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns.
Well, when it comes to the public sector, we know what a Labour-run public sector looks like. In Wales, that looks like the longest waiting times in the whole of the UK. Individuals waiting 2+ years for treatment in Wales is set at 24,000. In England, that has all but been eliminated. The Welsh Government receive £120 for every £100 spent in England. They get more than is able to be spent in England. And yet, they're the only government in the whole of the UK to have cut an NHS budget. And this isn't about receiving more money or less money. This is about priorities. Because the Labour and Welsh Government have prioritised £33 million on their blanket 20 miles per hour. They've prioritised £120 million on 36 extra politicians in Cardiff Bay. And yet they even offered the junior doctors less money than the Conservative government did in England. The Welsh Government are choosing not to prioritise the NHS here in Wales, and that is Labour's failure.
Thank you, Joe. Next we go to Kanishka Narayan from the Labour Party.
David, two direct answers. One, at the heart of Labour's plan for the general election is a New Deal for workers, putting dignity right back at the heart of the relationship between employers and employees, cutting 0 hours contract and giving people the security that they deserve every single day of work. But let me say something about what we've just been hearing. It's amazing to me that a Conservative recent Member of Parliament has not just been absent here, but is refusing to talk about the actual election at stake next week. We are electing a Westminster government here, not a Senedd government, not a local council government. The idea that somehow, because the relative budget proportions are in a particular way, that we can forgive and overlook the hammer blow to budgets across national, local and regional governments is horrific. Think about British National Health Service standards when Blair and the Labour government were in power. The best performance on waiting times generally, the best performance on cancer waiting times, highest patient satisfaction in the NHS. Are we really saying that what they've been doing to the economy and to public services as a result is something that is devolved to the council or devolved to Wales? Absolutely not. The choice next week is Westminster.
Thank you, Kanishka. We go to our next question.
The Vale has seen a lot of development in recent years, with plans for future large-scale developments in the county. Many residents are concerned about a lack of investment in community facilities and infrastructure. So I go to Samantha Campbell, who is an independent local councillor, for our next question.
How do you plan to maintain a cohesive balance between the potential overdevelopment of the rural Vale and our need for housing based on a population growth and a lack of services such as public transport, healthcare, schools and road infrastructures?
We're going to begin with Stephen Rajam from the Lib Dems.
I mentioned before about the average price of a house in the Vale of Glamorgan topping £300,000 recently, and when it comes to housing, I think it's a massive problem insofar as we have new housing developments in places like Clare Garden Village, in Graig Line, around Culverhouse Cross, which bring lots of pressure on our infrastructure. Whereas there's not enough affordable housing for our young people. If you're 20, 25 years old who's grown up in there, where on earth do you buy a house? And this is a problem that, we'd like to address by making sure that developers build more affordable homes for people, and that also, when they're developing, that much, much more thought is put into infrastructure and the pressures on things like roads and the wider local community.
Thank you, Stephen. We go next to Toby Rhodes-Matthews from Reform.
So I was going to have a drink then. So you're an independent councillor, yes? And we've got a councillor at the end there. I think the question you should ask yourselves, developments, when we're looking at developments, let's look at the Eagleswell development in Lantwick Major, where you've gone and put... I can't even describe it, I've got to keep it clean, it's a kids show. But an awful development... which has really, really upset the local community. It's lowered the price of their houses. It's really degraded the area, and insurance prices are higher. So we'll pick this up if I get elected. But outside of that, what we would do is we would fast track building on brown developments, and I would certainly ask you to think about housing people that really need housing locally in those developments that you're pushing at Eagleswell.
Thank you, Toby. We go next to Ian Johnson from Plaid.
It's quite funny following on from somebody who clearly doesn't understand how the housing or the planning system operates. So the Vale of Glamorgan has a local development plan, which is where it sets out its ambitions, if that's the right phrase, over a long period of time. Currently, there are more than 6,000 people on the housing waiting list in the Vale. We have there is a tension, therefore, between the development that you have and the impact that it has on people who already exist. These people, of course, live in the Vale. As a planning committee member, I can't comment specifically on Eagleswell. That'll be coming in front of us in a couple of weeks' time. I'll be making my decision at that point. But fundamentally, the challenge is ensuring that there is enough investment in things like the health service so that we have medical centres and GPs where these places are being built, and we don't just have houses with nothing else. Section 106 means that 40% of affordable houses are built in many parts of the Vale as developments, 30% in Barry. But there is a greater level of housing required. There's also a greater level of community investment required too.
Thank you, Ian. We go to Joe Kidd, representing Alan Cairns from the Conservatives.
Thank you, Samantha, for your question. Residents across the Vale of Glamorgan feel ignored. They feel ignored by the Labour-run council in their local development plan, putting houses across the Vale, overdevelopment on green spaces, and they feel ignored because they're not being engaged with in the proper consultations. I know from Alan's public meetings that he's held across the Vale of Glamorgan, the residents feel this way. The Labour-run council are not consulting, and instead they're choosing to prioritise spending money on their own priorities. And their priorities are a £3 million bus hub with no buses, an additional £3 million overspend on their internal IT system, and instead they're not putting money into the public services and the roads that you suggest. They're not fixing potholes, and they're not looking after our schools. The Vale of Glamorgan Council receive £728 less per pupil from the Labour-run Welsh Government. That is Labour ignoring the needs of residents.
Thank you, Joe.
Because it was the Conservatives who passed the local development plan.
Thank you. You've had your minute. We go next to Kanishka Narayan from the Labour Party.
Thank you, Rhys. Look, as a starting point, it's amazing to me that the Conservative representative is either running for the Council or the Senate rather than the election at stake. It's a Westminster election. There are two things, Samantha, that I would stand for in Westminster and one locally. First, a stable economy so that the inflation hit to mortgages, to rents, and even to builders' costs don't put us even further back in the housing affordability crisis that we experience as a community. Second, I've heard amazing things about your representation in Rhys, but the big thing I also hear from the community in Rhys is transport infrastructure in particular. I would fight for a good, fair funding deal for Westminster, from Westminster for Wales when it comes to transport specifically. But third, a practical difference I can try and make every day. Toby mentioned a particular site in Lantern Major. I've been in Dave's kitchen. I've been in Steve's living room looking at the site and hearing their experiences. I live on the waterfront. I've been working with neighbours of mine on specific practical differences we can make. Look, there's a national set of levers in Westminster. I'm going to pull them. But I'm also going to roll up my sleeves and make a difference locally, practically.
Thank you. Kanishka, we go next to Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Thank you, Sam. And your question was about overdevelopment of the rural Vale. Our mantra is to build the right houses in the right place at the right price. Here in Cymru, we would commit to building 12,000 new homes a year. Most of those would be social homes. That's where we think a lot of the demand is. Small developments around existing settlements, not huge estates, large fields being ploughed up with large estates built on them. So small patchwork, whereas as far as possible. And those houses built to passive house eco standards for all. They've got to have integrated public transport with them, and also come along with, as others have said earlier, medical facilities like doctors' surgeries and schools. And we'd also build in sewage treatment as well into these, because at the moment it's not built into the thinking around all the houses that are being built. So we would certainly do all that. And that's...
Thank you, Lyndon. Our next question, please.
We received a large number of questions about the rubbish and pollution on our beaches and rivers. The Vale of Glamorgan has a number of local groups who make use of these sites, and we've recently seen the council advising these residents to not swim in places such as Ogmore, as pollution levels mean it is not safe. And so we would like to ask the candidates what initiatives or policies they'd implement so that Glamorgan beaches and rivers can be used without fear of pollution.
We're going to begin with Toby Rhodes-Matthews from Reform UK.
Thank you very much. Litter and rubbish, I think we need to invest more local on the council to look at more bins, more receptacles, just to provide the opportunity to put waste away. I know that sounds really simple, but it does help. But moreover, I think the big one in the news is the water treatment plants and the big industries that are and have been dumping sewage in the local fresh water in the rivers. I would certainly look to take those on, and I would make sure that they are held to account for every time that they've dumped their rubbish into our fresh water. And just like they would take money and find us if we've done wrong, I will make sure that the same is paid to them.
Thank you, Toby. We go next to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
Obviously, the amount of sewage being pumped into our rivers and seas is an absolute disgrace and shows the failure of 35 years since privatisation of the water industry. In Wales, of course, we have a not-for-profit company, Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water, and that still doesn't seem to have made a difference. So I think that's very disappointing from that sense. It should be. I think it makes sense to nationalise the whole industry. We need investment in the infrastructure. We need to ensure that to come back to the previous question, when we have new houses, that Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water are able to actually look after the sewage that comes out of these developments. It's only the first year that we've had Watchtower Bay and Ogmore figures come out. A few years ago, the water quality around the Vale was great. Now it's less good. It would be tempting to blame Brexit. That's one thing we haven't talked about tonight. But also, as I say, the under investment in the infrastructure is shocking.
Thank you, Ian. We go next to Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns.
The sewage being discharged into our seas and waterways is nothing short of a disgrace. And I'd like to start by paying tribute to Adam Phillips, who has been leading the Ogmore River Clean campaign over in Ogmore by Sea. Adam Phillips has brought the community together, and he's brought the community together to tackle the sewage being discharged into our waterways and our seas with a lack of action against Welsh water by the Labour and Welsh Government. This is a devolved issue, sewage management in Wales, and Labour are taking not as tough action as the UK government. It's an issue everywhere, but we are making progress in England. the campaign in Ogmore by Sea has been amazing to see. And Alan Cairns has been supporting this campaign since day one, the only candidate to support this campaign since day one, and the only candidate to attend all of the river cleans and help support them. It's a really important issue, and this is one close to Alan's heart.
Thank you, Joe. We go next to Kanishka Narayan.
Thank you, Lily, for sharing that question. Look, there are a couple of things that Westminster can do. The economic regulation of our water industry sits with Westminster. So one, Labour would ensure that the directors of water companies repeatedly carrying out this stuff get punished at a UK level. And so both their bonuses and criminal liability regimes, I think that can really put the heat on directors is a promise that we're making in the general election. I think that will make a difference and change the conversation, hopefully in a way that we can benefit from locally here as well. I think Ian's point on regulatory change are pretty apt, and I'd largely agree with a number of his particular claims on the failure of the regulatory structure. I have some specific ideas which can move the needle. But let me say the third thing. I have been at the Ogmore River Clean with Alan Phillips and with Alan, and I've seen the amazing power. I haven't just been there for the photo. I've actually then sat down with the CEO of Keep Wales Tidy afterwards to talk about how we continue that repeatedly, but scale it, and also push the water companies to be much more transparent about real-time sharing of information so that surfers against sewage, who I've also spent time with, don't suffer again and again from it.
Thank you, Kanishka. We go to Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Thank you for the question. It's a matter close to my heart. I'm a member of Friends of Barry Beaches, who's always picking up plastic off those beaches there locally, and I'm also a sea swimmer all year round. The Green Party's position is we would bring the water utilities back into public ownership. It's been an absolute disaster, hasn't it? And it's been the failures represented by £72 billion worth of monies have gone to shareholders and to the city in London, which could have been invested in preventing this from happening. The Tory cutbacks over in England to the Environmental Agency is a direct correlation between the amount of sewage we're seeing now and the scale of the cutbacks that organisation has faced. It's all about building infrastructure, and there's something in the short term they can do here in Barry is that, the Dŵr Cymru could treat the water all year round, at least through the winter months. They define the bathing savings.
Thank you, Lyndon. We go next to Stephen Rajam.
I think my colleagues have captured the staggering level of this. The Vale of Glamorgan was polluted by sewage 1,767 times in 2023, and we have two of the two worst designated bathing beaches in Wales, receiving a poor rating at Watchtower Bay, as was mentioned, and Ogmore by Sea. And yes, while this is a devolved issue, Joe, it's worth pointing out that Alan Cairns has repeatedly voted against measures that would improve water quality in the UK, in Westminster. So look, what would we do? We'd bring in a sewage tax on water company profits. We'd ban the payment of bonuses to water company executives until sewage discharges and leaks were shown to have stopped. And we'd bring in a newer, stronger regulator to replace Ofwat. I just want to say more widely, environmental policies are fundamental to all of our Lib Dem policies, from energy to sewage to all our economic reforms, green energy. And it all slightly rankles when I hear people saying we're going to vote green. If you really care about green issues, you should vote orange.
Thank you, Stephen. We're coming to the end of our programme for tonight and would like to get through as many of our questions left as possible. So, for our final questions, could the candidates please answer them in 30 seconds? We go to our next question.
So our next question is from Sam Brown.
Sorry, I don't have my question printed, so it's on here. So I work in music, working for music engineers remotely from Barry. My question to you really is, how would you support the creative sector, not just in the Vale but across the country, because music and art is such an integral part of Welsh culture and history and general life that it's sad to see that being systematically torn apart. So I don't know if that's a question, but I think it is.
Okay, we'll begin with Lyndon Mack, please.
Yeah, I support it totally. I'm a member of the Barry Arts Central Group. It's in our manifesto. We recognise the benefits of cultural life in general, music, the arts generally, to the well-being of people, mental health, and it all feeds back then to NHS and all things like that. So it's in our manifesto and we put a high regard on it.
Thank you, Lyndon. We go next to Kanishka Narayan.
Hey Sam, great question, and having followed some of your work recently as well, I think it's great to hear from you. Look, two things. One, I think at the underpinning level, security of work for musicians and those in our creative sector who too often don't get the right sort of level of support in their employment relationship. Our plans are going to hopefully do that in the creative sectors in particular as well. But two, a very practical thing that I'm excited about. So much of modern music, as you'll know better than me, is about modern technology. And I'm really focused on bringing very high quality jobs, the right digital infrastructure to support our next generation of musicians.
Thank you. We go to Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns, please.
Thank you, Sam, for your question. An important point underpinning the music industry is the fantastic businesses that are involved. And one way to secure the industry and promote it as the best we can is to ensure that these businesses are paying less tax. Business rates in England, the business rate relief is set at 75%. That's a 75% discount on the business rates that these businesses pay. Whereas in Wales, that is set at 40% discount. The Welsh Government received the money to make the same discount, but they chose not to.
Thank you, Joe. We go to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
So on the one hand, there's the ability for musicians to travel and to tour Europe and work in different fields. So that's reversing Brexit, in all purposes. I'd look at the basic income for the arts scheme that's in the Republic of Ireland that's just finished its first year and see what lessons we can learn from that in terms of a Welsh freelancers fund that looks at that and undo the cuts that have been made to the Arts Council of Wales, which are cascading through the industry.
Thank you, Ian. We go next to Stephen Rajam from the Lib Dems.
Thanks, Sam. And it's a question close to my heart. Some of you might know my day job is to work as a business. I run a business in the cultural sector. Two specific things that we want to address. We must protect S4C and also the BBC and Channel 4 as independently, publicly owned public service broadcasts in terms of the amount of business they do for the arts. But more specifically, Brexit has hammered the ability of musicians and artists to travel to the EU. It's something none of the other parties are talking about. And personally, I know several people who can't go at all. Thank you.
We go to Toby Rhodes from Reform.
30 seconds is over quite quick. It's embarrassing. There's nothing in here about music and culture in our contract with you. But what we do say is we will raise profit tax thresholds. So if you're a limited business, that's good. We'll abolish the I-35 rules. So maybe your mates can come in and play as well. They can draw business on that, and you won't have to worry about those rules for keep hurrying them in and using them over and over again in the band. Nothing in there for now, but culturally and business, fully supportive, and we'll have another conversation again on this if we can.
We go on to our final question.
So our final question is from Michael Evans, who couldn't be here tonight, and Michael would like to ask, would you rebel against your party line if it was clear that the party's policy was contrary to the wishes of the voters in the Vale and not in their best interests, or will the party whip always come first?
We're going to begin with Stephen Rajam.
Simple answer, yes.
Thank you. We go to Toby Rhodes from Reform.
Absolutely, yes. Country, constituency, yeah. But I'll always put my constituency above the party, which sits third.
Thank you, Toby. We go to Ian Johnson from Plaid Cymru.
As Plaid Cymru's head of policy, I genuinely hope there's nothing in the party manifesto I'd ever want to disagree with. So, in terms of answering the question, I mean, as an MP, I'd there to represent my constituents' best interest. But as head of policy, I'd hope there's nothing that goes against that.
Thank you, Ian. We go to We go to Lyndon Mack from the Green Party.
Yes, absolutely. Every time the Green Party does not whip its MPs, we're free to represent. Yes, just the one for now, just the one. We represent the views of our constituents. We're absolutely free to do that. We do not whip.
Thank you. And we go to Joe Kidd representing Alan Cairns.
As his time as an MP, Alan has shown that he always puts the Vale of Glamorgan first. He's delivering for local people with extra investment into the Vale of Glamorgan, unprecedented levels of investment into Barry, a £20 million Barry Marina and £20 million for town centre regeneration. That's putting local residents and the Vale of Glamorgan first.
Thank you, Joe. And finally we go to Kanishka Narayan.
Look, I've spent 18 months listening to the constituents in the Vale of Glamorgan. If I have the privilege of being elected as IMP next week, I'd hope to continue doing that for the next 5 years. Absolutely.
Thank you, Kanishka. That's it then now for our questions from you, our listeners. But before we finish, each candidate will now have 1 minute for a closing statement. And we begin with Plaid Cymru candidate Ian Johnson.
Thank you very much for listening to tonight's show. It's been very interesting to hear the range of thoughts that have come across. As a local resident and somebody with more than a decade's experience within public service within the Vale of Glamorgan, I think I would like the chance to represent the Vale of Glamorgan in the House of Commons as the Member of Parliament. My priorities in political terms here are those which have been shared with many of you tonight, in terms of ensuring that we can reduce child poverty, making sure that we can cut poverty for people in general through an essentials guarantee, ensuring fair funding for Wales, to make sure that we have the services that we deserve, and making sure as part of that we have the funding which can then go into our health service so that we can increase the number of GPs that we have, so that everybody gets an appointment when they need one.
Thank you, Ian. Next we go to Joe Kidd, representing Conservative candidate Alan Cairns.
Your vote in the Vale of Glamorgan will decide who is your local MP. It won't be Rishi Sunak, and it won't be Sir Keir Starmer, but it will be Alan Cairns, with a record of delivering for local people, or the Labour candidate, who will take us back to square one. We have so much to be proud of in the Vale of Glamorgan, and we are making progress on even more. A £20 million marina in Barry, an additional £20 million for town centre regeneration, a train station in St Athan, and much more. Labour's priorities are £33 million on blanket 20 miles per hour, £120 million on extra politicians in Cardiff Bay, to name just two. And at a local level, the Labour Council have put council tax up by 6.7%, spent £3 million on a bus hub with no buses, and an additional £3 million on internal IT overspend, cutting back your services at the same time. That is Keir Starmer's blueprint for Labour in power, and it just shows that Labour have no plan.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Labour Party candidate Kanishka Narayan.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a great evening of discussion. Let me say two things. One, your up until recent incumbent MP has failed to show up to listen to the local community, and the only thing his representatives talked about is trying to run for the council or run for the Senate. Council Judgment Day is 2027, Senate election date is 2026. You're welcome to vote for the representative at those types. The election next week is for Westminster. There is a single choice ahead of everyone in this room and at home, which is, do we want 5 more years of Rishi Sunak's Conservative chaos in our economy, at our borders, in our justice system, in the lived experience of people in the Vale of Glamorgan, or do we want a change, a degree of stability, and then the sight of hope again? I hope you'll choose change. That's what I've been fighting for 18 months. I think we have a credible, honest and optimistic plan for government, and I hope you'll vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanishka. Next up is Green Party candidate Lyndon Mack.
Ladies and gentlemen, why vote Green? A Green vote will be effective in putting down a real marker for the kinds of changes that our society needs. As I door knock, I'm picking up a lot of dissatisfaction with the usual business as usual parties. Express your disapproval and disaffection with them through the ballot box. The Greens really do have the policies that can respond at scale to the enormous challenges we face. It's about being realistic about the sheer scale the change is needed, and it's the very foundation of the hope that we offer in our policies. Vote for a just transition, vote Green on the 4th of July. Thank you for all for coming, and thanks for Bro Radio for putting this event on tonight.
Thank you, Lyndon. Next up is Liberal Democrat candidate Stephen Rajam.
Thank you. We've heard a lot of discussion and sometimes disagreement tonight, but every single person here truly wants to make our community a better place, and I'm proud to be sharing this Hustings stage with them. So why am I here trying to persuade you to vote Lib Dem? Well, you know, my dad came to the UK from Sri Lanka 6 decades ago because he truly believed in the British sense of fairness. And I remember growing up in the 80s and 90s watching the telly with him and how I'd be amazed and flabbergasted by the two main parties hurling insults and mud at each other across the House of Commons and in the papers. He couldn't understand why they didn't just stop yapping and work together to make things better and fairer for everyone, not just their supporters. Now, today, millions of people don't think they're getting a fair deal. Not from the Conservatives, not from Welsh Labour, not from the promises Keir Starmer's offering. But by voting Lib Dem, you can vote for a fair deal. One that works for families, for small businesses, for carers, for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Finally, we have Reform candidate Toby Rhodes-Matthews.
A very sweaty, hot Toby Rhodes-Matthews. Look, trust in politicians at the moment is an all-time low. That's a fact. Yeah. So ask yourself this question, when you go home tonight and whether you're listening at home now on the radio, is can the people sat at this table genuinely deliver on what they've said to you tonight? Can they and will they deliver on what they've said? Given that the gambling's in the news at the moment, I'd put a tenner on saying that they won't. So, and also, please don't be fooled by a Labour government in Westminster and a Labour Senate. You still got no power as a Labour government over the Senate. It's devolved matters and matters that are key to you. They can't influence. Look, like my party, I'm open, I'm honest, I'm trustworthy, and just like I said at the beginning, I've served my country, and now I want to serve the Vale of Glamorgan.
Thank you,
Thank you.
So that wraps up the second of two 2024 general election hustings here on Bro Radio. Thank you to each of the candidates for joining us this evening.